Don't let the internet browse you. Viper VPN.
Okay. Hello, humans. That was the view of the Pacific Ocean. I'm going to take a quick second here. And let's pop that up. Okay, guys, let me know that sound is all right, please. And any video issues. Okay, guys, I've got the chat. Okay, we're 5 by 5. Okay, good. I will put chat away for a minute. Okay, so this is a particularly interesting little talk in at least anticipating it here. Got to get my notes. First off, a disclaimer. Nothing I'm going to say here is going to be financial advice. It'll be a general discussion of things economic and things financial and things fiscal and woo-woo, as well as recent historical patterns that I've been analyzing for months. And none of it should be taken as an indication of where to put your money, what to buy, or any of that sort of thing. So the point of this is a discussion about why I'm not doing a report for December, what I've learned in analyzing the data for all of 2018, and specifically for certain changes relative to year over year, and how the data basically got screwy or hijacked. Okay, it's a conspiracy theory, right? I'm making a statement that I think that it was hijacked, or at least redirected or manipulated or polluted with some deliberate intent. Not just at me, not at my system, but my system picked it up, and it was a side effect. It polluted my data, but their goal was probably something else entirely. So I'm going to switch us over to some charts here, let you have a second to have a look at it, and then start discussing some of the stuff I've found out. So disclaimer aside, all right? So this isn't financial advice, but I've been analyzing financial data and plotting it against the influx of my web scraping linguistic data and covering a period from March of 2017 through to this date. And there have been some marked changes that I can now pick out. Now, I should have anticipated it. I should have caught it while it was occurring. I thought I had caught something in October, November-ish of last year, but I was obviously seriously afflicted with the disease state I was in, and that undoubtedly affected my energy, time, and mental power to pick up on some things. Okay, so I was snookered. Along with in the sense that things happened to the data that I wasn't filtering out, that I wasn't catching in real time as I had in past years. And I can show you this on my first chart here, which is we're going to be dealing with a Bitcoin to USD crypto chart. And we'll use that chart for the entirety of this talk, and we'll use it as a backdrop. And I've plotted against a chart from tradingview.com, which I stole their chart, and then I manipulated it in the sense of adding graphics to it to illustrate some of my points. And I've got some notes that go along with this. Now, I started this in September. I was just at that point starting to recover some energy, had anticipated, I almost died in July. I mean, literally on July 13th was that was the day that I didn't die, but I should have based on that continuing trend. I was rescued by emergency surgery. I recovered over the rest of July and August, and it wasn't until August that I was able to think my way out of the anesthesia amnesia, they call it, because they do all kinds of things to your mind in order to have you not remember anything as traumatic as the kind of surgery I went through. And I'd have to say that I'd had maybe a 4-year run with what they diagnosed as breast cancer. And it was very painful, but the stuff I went through from 2015 onward was the most excruciating pain I could imagine, and it was not caught by any of the hospital. 3 times in 2015 I almost died. I ended up in an emergency room, and they still threw me out or let me go that day because they couldn't find anything, and I recovered relatively rapidly. And it was because of the strange nature of the condition I had, which was intussusception. Anyway, though, so it seriously impacted me over 2017 and all of 2018 up until July. Then I started recovering, and then in August I started doing things to make my brain recover from the anesthesia amnesia and start gaining energy again. And so in September, early part of September, like the 3rd or 4th, I had the data. I dumped out the database in August and set up all these automated processes for the web scraping and the loading of the SQL Server. And then in September 4th or so, it was the 3rd or 4th, I started examining the data sets. And it was very peculiar, to say the least. Now, it was a good thing in a sense that I hadn't even really looked at any of the data at all through July and August, from the point from July 13th onward, because I saw everything with fresh eyes. Now, it also could have been the effect of the amnesia having wiped out so much of the recent past there, so I was looking at things all new again. And so I saw some things in the data in September that made me think something is not correct. And as always, just the nature of who I am, I assumed it was my fault. Universe has taught me most often it is my fault. So I look there first, right? I'm efficient. I want to find the fault right away and get to it. It's like debugging. So I had assumed that it was my fault, and I started looking at my code to see what could have changed relative to the data. Now you have to understand that the data sets on the outside are web scraping. Okay, they come off of URLs, they come off of websites, all different kinds of websites, many of which are run by JavaScript and don't have really HTML other than a couple of headers, and it's all propagated out in the form of post commands from the server. So these websites can change underneath my data set, even if the structure of the site was well known and everything. And so my processing changes continuously simply because everybody's changing their websites all the time, and they may add in advertising and things. And so my program's smart, and it knows if there's advertising to discriminate and get it out of there. But some of the sites it would go to, the advertising is buried in within JavaScript, within JavaScript, within JavaScript. And so it takes it some time to process through all of this and then weed through on some of the advertising. And it means that particular page is being processed in a different manner than it had been in the past. And just because I'm thorough, and because HTML was ever so much more static in the in the late 1990s when I started this off, in the early 2000s, there was very little JavaScript propagation of complete web pages within scripts, within scripts, within scripts. And it was mainly static HTML. So I did the processing such that I would know if the web page had changed since the last time I'd swept through it, or if the processing had to change because of some underlying, the URL wasn't there anymore or whatever, right? So some of these things made a big difference in how the data is processed. And when I started looking in September, I started seeing that a ton of I could not say it. I'd have to guesstimate maybe 45% more websites are being processed differently than they had the past run because of elements within those sites themselves. This is huge. It's 45% over the vast majority of our sites is pretty large. Usually 14, 15% maybe in a standard run. In a really good period there where we had the 408 to 428 loops, within those pages, or within that report, I was running at a very low 6 to 9%. And I just internally made the assumption, oh, we're starting to level out. Maybe we'll just get at 6 to 9% from that point on, and everything's going to get in the groove. We'll get into a flow. It didn't work out that way. The reason it didn't work out that way was this damn election bullshit and the fight between the deep state and the rest of the world. When they, okay, so conspiracy warning, all right. It may have been that the Blue Chicken cult, Corey Goode, Blue Avians, Gaia TV, David Wilcock, and it may have been that all of that was promulgated in some form by the deep state. Now, the actors in that drama may have no knowledge that they were useful idiots for the deep state. But it's my opinion that the deep state analyzed what was going on if they didn't plan it. Okay, they could have planned it, found the useful idiot Corey Goode doing shit, put money underneath him and David Wilcock and Gaia, and off we go. And that was where I really tumbled into what was going on the woo-woo side within the data sets. And I should have thought at that time, of course, my excuse being that I was very ill, I should have thought about that time in 2015 that, oh, maybe it's extending over into, or maybe it will at some point in the future, extend over into the financial crypto kind of thing. Didn't occur to me. I thought it was isolated to the woo-woo stuff. However, those same patterns of disruption, disinformation, and promotion of promulgation of the disinformation. So somebody's paying for disinformation to be made public, and then they're also paying for other people, other useful idiots, to pick up on that information and put it out all over the place so that disinformation spreads in a seemingly organic manner. And I've tumbled to a lot of these patterns in my recent analysis. Now, my analysis has been going on really heavily in November and October. I mean, I got into some of the serious math involved, had to write a bunch of new programs just to examine the algorithms that I had set up and why those patterns were failing. And so here's what I think has happened. Okay, again, a conspiracy warning here. I think that CIA, Deep State, NSA, whatever the hell we want to call them, found a useful idiot in the collection that I called the Blue Chicken cult. They put money behind him, and they did a propagation study, as I did in the early 2000s, and they watched the propagation of that disinformation through the internet, and its reach, and its impact, and the intensity of its impact, as I do, as I monitor linguistically. And so when they did this, it may have been part of a larger pattern, or Blue Chickens might have been organic, and just a bunch of wackos that came together at Universe's urging, and off you go. And then the deep state tumbled to what was going on and used it for their own purposes. So if we look at the chart here, I'm going to very carefully try and move things without causing things to happen. So we look at this, at the far left, we see MSM fake news complacency. So it was in this period of time from the 2014, leading up through into the election period, that the mainstream media the deep state thought they had everything dialed down 5 nines, right? Dialed down to 5 digits perfection of precision. And they were complacent. And they were ignorant, and their ignorance and their complacency fed back to themselves, and the MSM and all of the deep state and its progressive push failed, and they were like blindsided when the Trump and the populist revolution took over. They should have seen it in Brexit, in my opinion, but that's neither here nor there. So anyway, they were in a period of complacency, and I've been able to track the economic data and the political data in that complacency period. I've been able to nail down the emotional tones on it very tightly, ran it multiple times. It was a period of good data sets for us, where we had some really effective production of predictions for cryptos that were, decent. I mean, to the point where a lot of people made a lot of money on them. And then things went wonky, okay? Here's the reason that it went wonky. about the same time in 2017 that we got this wind up in Bitcoin that ran it all the way up to 13,000 plus. About that time, and I'm putting it down here as May 1, okay, there was a launch of a deliberate escalation of language through disinformation sites. And the launch of that information was then backed by money in a way that I had not, that the pattern of which mirrors the blue chicken cult, but is magnified by several orders of magnitude. I mean, it is just huge compared to the amount of money put behind the blue chicken cult. And this language change was ubiquitous. It was throughout all of mainstream media. The language change was in the same patterns as I had seen with the blue chicken cult, relative to the disparity between what the blue chicken cult was putting out and the language of the organic tribes that were in that space. Okay, so the blue chicken cult lifted some language from the organic language out of the woo-woo, out of the UFO world, and then they took other language from media, Hollywood entertainment, and put it back on that language and fed this back in. When they did that, the emotional tone of the Hollywood language was very large relative to the emotional tone of the UFO language. However strident UFO guys are, the stridency is moderated below a certain base level. Whereas all of the language coming out of Hollywood is all hype and hyperbole, etc., right? And so it's all above that baseline. So I was able to easily see, once I started figuring out what was going on with the language of the blue chicken cult. That same kind of thing has occurred now. And I'm if you notice at the very top on the right-hand side, I say it's desperation. It's extreme language. And the mainstream media and the deep state behind it are using extreme language in a way that I'd never seen before. Now, extreme language is dangerous because you get to the point where you have like the yellow vest revolution in France, where the language itself is participating in roiling the populace and moving them into motivation. And they can dampen extreme language. However, if they're using extreme language in the mainstream media and throughout these disinformation outlets, for another agenda, that language can get away from them, all right? And the deep state doesn't know memes. It knows symbols, but it doesn't know how those symbols are taken by people other than the elite. So they're judging symbols' impact on all of us based on how they react, and it's entirely a different thing. Which actually goes to the idea that maybe the elite are not quite human. You know, they're not quite like the rest of humanity. In any event, so we see this period of time. That's what I'm suggesting here, right? We see this period of time that begins about May 1 in 2017, where we start seeing the run-up in Bitcoin. Now, the language actually had been seeded back in... Okay, all right. So let me go back to that point. From May 1 to August 1 in 2017, we see a ramp up in the Bitcoin prices, an organic ramp up, in my opinion, that was slowly starting to be fueled by the extremity of language that the deep state was putting into their outlets for propagation. And then August 1, we see another big uptick in language, but it was negative language. That's that little dip after August. And we had an extreme dip, not for Bitcoin, but an extreme dip in the language. And then as we get into October 31, Q Day so the first Q drop on Halloween in 2017, we start seeing the ramp up in language go hyperbolic, I mean exponential. And it was at that point we noticed we also get this run up in Bitcoin that began, and it was just way the hell off of the charts relative to the previous projections. I expected to end the year nowhere near the 13,000 mark because that had showed up as being in February. I didn't know within our data sets at that point that I was looking at a number that would be this like tail end of a plateau thing before the plunge down. Okay, it just said 13,000 in February, and I made some assumptions that were invalid. Nonetheless, we reached 13,888 on the combined Bitcoins in the middle of February, so it was accurate at that point, but it was not accurate relative to which direction the trend was going. Okay, so going back to August, pre-Q drops, all right, and pre-Q phenomenon. The language started changing in August. Now, the nature of the financial language, if you go back and analyze it from August through to the middle of November, is again reaching into hyperbole in a level that we don't usually see within the mainstream media. So the economic, the fiscal language was all getting whipped up, so to speak, right? And the extremity of it, the emotional impact, the intensity, not the duration, not how long it lasts, but rather the emotional pop you got out of that language and how they organized it, was scaling up from August through into mid-November. Now, at the end of October, we have the Q drops. We can make an assumption here, or I can talk about it this way. There, in a binary fashion, it could be that Q was legit or Q was some kind of a game. It doesn't matter who's running that game at this point, okay? If Q was legit, then I think it's been hijacked at this stage. And so now I think we can eliminate option number one, and we're concentrating on option number two, which is that something's gaming this Q language and the Q phenomenon. It could be that the deep state is doing the Q manipulation for its own purposes. Or it actually could be that anti-deep state forces are in charge of the Q language and have directed that for their own purposes. The Q language changes dramatically in early 2018. And so it was my supposition that Q was legit, had been shot in the head, and the trip code taken, and it was handed over to a group, a disinformation group from that point forward. This is all pertinent, believe me, okay? You're not going to believe what's going to be pertinent to Bitcoin prices as we go forward, and I've got another chart I need to show you. Again, it's the same chart, just graphicked up. So we see that I'm pegging here I'm pointing at the screen now, guys, but I'm pegging here as of August 1, where the cursor is. We start seeing domination of MSM, mainstream media, and their new emotional tone. And there's a slight dip, as I said, because they got their extreme language wrong for a little tiny bit, and then they got it correct. Or maybe it was deliberate. Maybe they wanted to take it down, and somebody wanted to harvest a few coins so that they could write it on up. Anyway, and then they go. And so they take the price of Bitcoin up. So it was manipulated. Now, backing that manipulation was actual Bitcoins from Mt. Gox, which we didn't find out until early 2018. So there was actual not physical, but manipulation of the Bitcoin price through Bitcoin acquisition and movement and so on, right? They pump the price up and then they crash it after the first part of January by selling in these Mt. Gox Bitcoins and flooding the market, so to speak, in order to drive the price down. So we're looking at here with this big spike that goes from August 1 up through into 2018, and then the drop, it goes up into, hang on just a second, gonna have to take this. Sorry about that. I hope our sound's still good, guys. Are we still 5x5 on sound, please? Can someone just splash in 5x5? I can see it scrolling past if we do that. We should be... Okay, didn't mean to... all right, we're good. Okay. So here's the thing. So it doesn't matter insofar as the discussion I've got here as to what's going on with Q, right? Who's running it, whether it's a group or any of that. I can just simply say that after the trip code was hacked in December, through this like 15-day period of time, there was like a battle over the trip code, and then it was moved over to 8chan. From that point on, the language changed. And I wasn't much interested because I couldn't track the trip code, and the language shifting from 4chan to 8chan really made me suspect something was up. But I didn't really pay any attention to it, nor fold it into any of this, until I started looking at some of these things in September. And then it was like, wait a second, shit ain't right in Whoville. Things are a little bit odd here. And so anyway, so this is the encapsulation of basically where we are now. All right, this is a chart up to today. I'm showing that the emotional domination of the emotional tone has been dominated by the mainstream media from effectively August. Now here's the problem. It's not mainstream media per se, but the word scripts, the talking points that we see in the mainstream media are being promulgated into alt media in a way that is just too egregious to miss, and too much work at this point. I'm going to have to write entire new algorithms for some of my web scraping as to the secondary process or the primary processing off of that for stuff to put into the database. The issue is that the promulgation is being done by lots of useful idiots. And so we have disinformation that's being promulgated all to hell and gone. Okay, let's take, for instance, another questionable subject, and that is this thing about the constantly escalating sealed indictments. And that language is just flooding the internet. And it's gotten so ubiquitously accepted because of disinformation shills. Whether they know themselves to be shills or not, they are. And it's become so ubiquitously accepted because it's been repeated over and over and over and over and over again. Now, one key thing is you notice on these sealed indictments, the number never goes down. And sealed indictments constantly do that. And there's one single source document for this, all of this sealed indictment stuff, and it keeps showing constantly escalating numbers on a sheet of paper that has bad emails and Twitter handles and bad URLs. So I don't know how anybody that can claim to be a researcher could actually even accept it at that. Prima facie evidence says this is squirrely. And so you would certainly do a secondary evidence and see if you can find this same information in Pacer. And then you would go to Pacer and you would see that they're only picking up sealed cases, which 99.9999% are going to be routine business. It's not like we've stopped our regular criminal justice system just because of this political investigation that's going on. Okay, so also, by the way, a new wrinkle in that is that you've got people coming on out saying that Huber, an attorney general out of Utah, has 470 individuals, and the implication is that they were newly hired just to work for him. That's bogus. It's bullshit. And this is a new wrinkle that's being put on to the 66, it's now 66,000 or higher. Last I heard it was 66,000 something in terms of sealed indictments. And this is utterly rubbish. But it's being promulgated all around and no one's questioning it, and nobody has any sense at all and ever goes to look at the actual Pacer documents. And it doesn't cost you that much, guys. It costs you 10 cents a page to get access to that. You don't even have to pay money. You can go through Pacer to the U.S. courts and get the information for free because they have to post it all on their systems that give their end of the month reports and so on. Here's the thing. A lot of guys don't know this, but there used to be a tactic in especially Masonic-controlled court systems where they would drag it out Just drag it out, drag it out, drag it out, drag it out, motions, all this kind of stuff. Well, the federal government was sued back in the late 50s, early 60s for those kind of tactics. And they had to, as part of that suit settlement, they had to come up with a mechanism for enforcing timeliness in the federal court system. And that further in the 70s and 80s was shifted down into the state and local court system. Justice denied is frequently caused by justice delayed. The tactic of, oh, well, we'll just wait till the old guy dies, right? He can sue us only so long, then he'll die and we don't have to worry about it. That sort of thing from a corporation view. But from the federal government, because they were sued and there was all these suits against the government itself for basically constitutional violations, had to put in systems for managing the courts. Further, there were economic incentives for doing so. So the document being presented for these 66,000 indictments is bogus, and it's necessary to determine that so that we can follow the language effectively that's all around it and speculate as to what might be the point of that language. Now, I know that all that language with the 66,000 sealed cases, which there have indeed been 66,000 sealed cases so far in the period of time represented by that document. What that document does not tell you is that 65,420 of those have been opened and resolved, and they're done. So they're citing a sealed case back in January, but hey, that one was settled and done by May. They just don't tell you that. So they're also misinterpreting the evidence or misinterpreting the statements by the courts. Sealed versus sealed is not an indictment, and it does not involve the federal government. And even if it were true that sealed versus sealed, as reported by the courts, could involve the federal government and was an indictment, there have been 38 that have carried through in 2018. So it'd be 36 to 38 sealed indictments, if they were indeed indictments. Nowhere in there do we see the grand jury language, which is necessary for an indictment except for being caught in a criminal act, right, on the face of it. Those are handled through arraignments. Anyway, though, so let's get back to the charts here. So in 2018, we can add the transformation of the Q information. It can be good, bad, and even if it is controlled by the deep state, they're going to give you good information, stuff that pans out because they want to keep you following. The whole point of the Q thing is, at this point, it's actually being promoted in the sense of the language being moved into the mainstream media and kept alive through the mainstream media, even by denial and attack, because that's a good tactic. It's a false flag, so to speak, on information. If they want you to believe something, they'll attack it ferociously. Things that I almost called this talk here, by the way, Michelle Obama's dick, right? Because it occurred to me, those things they want you to tumble to, they don't really hide. They just don't ever talk about it, right? They don't deny it because denial is talking about it. They simply ignore it. And so throughout the entire 8 years, everybody in the mainstream media everywhere ignored Michelle Obama's dick. Okay, Michael Obama, that's his real name. Or I don't even think you can call him Obama. But the guy who was the first lady, our transgender dickful wonder for the Obama years, they didn't try and hide any of the exposure of that dick in photos, which tells me they wanted everybody to get used to the idea that there were going to be transgenders and gender ambiguous individuals that were going to be ruling over us. And they just basically, and they also sent a subtle message when they killed Joan Rivers for mentioning it. And that is, who you're not, who rules you when you're killed for bringing out information about them. In other words, those who rule you can't be criticized. And so it wasn't allowed. And she was a public figure at a certain echelon, so they had to pop her off. And that put the kibosh on anybody else at that level and above, bringing this discussion out into the open, which is what they want to avoid. Okay, if they brought it out into the open, then the issue of acceptance and the why of it becomes too painfully obvious. And they didn't want that. They just simply want you to accept that there's going to be gender ambiguous individuals that will rule over you, and get used to it, you fucktards. And so that's where we were at. Now, the issue there is, the difference is that we have Q could have just been ignored. They just could have let the mainstream media could have done just with Q what they did with Michael Obama's dick, right? Michelle Obama's dick. They could have just ignored it, never put it up there. Sure, have the pictures of people with the Q patches, but just don't reference it. If it's not referenced, it's simply not legit, and they're not putting any of their energy behind it. There's rules, energy rules as to how all of this shit works. Anyway, so that's where we're at. The Q thing is being promoted. It's being promulgated. There's money behind that. They're putting space in mainstream media to be anti-Q, which tells me that there's a reason they want me to be pro-Q because I'm anti-them. So it's like, okay, I understand what's going on there. Now, it doesn't mean I'm correct on that, but it does mean that there's that possibility, so I have to act with that possibility in mind. And form my paradigm with that possibility in mind that I'm being played if I buy into the Q language, okay? And I had to form the possibility in my mind that I would be being played if I bought into the 66,000 constantly escalating sealed indictments. I can't wait for it to reach 100,000. That'll be really cool. We can all celebrate 100,000. Indictments would require just about 40 million people to be involved in the justice system just to handle that many. All the attorneys that would pile on in and all of this kind of thing. So, so it's totally unreal, but people are so ignorant because they've been made to be ignorant because of the quality of education here. Which again, pulls into the MSM and the deep state's means here. Now, it caught me, okay? I was ill through this period here. I got extremely ill and had surgery in the middle of 2018. But the data pollution began before the December report and the March report and the July report. And it was actually really ramping up by July. And the disinformation and the way in which it was done, I can now pull it out, but I could not at that point. And I didn't understand it until looking back in hindsight and having to, as I say, write some new little snippets of programs to go on back and present me with comparison views of data sets, which I could then plot. And I could say, oh, okay, now I see where this occurred and what's going on. And I'm showing you the end result of that. And so we're going to move on to another slide here. Okay, so we're still within the domination period of the mainstream media. Because of I'm a little paranoid, and I like to have a big chunk of data from which to make an analysis from which to derive a conclusion. I don't have that about what happened in the 2-year hiatus of Bitcoin prices, the crash from Mt. Gox through 2014 and 15. Because it just wasn't discussed, and there's no way to historically get back at untainted information. So all of the information now about the Mt. Gox fiasco in 2013-14 has been tainted by all the words that have been piled on top of it since then. And it's not like I actually go through and read the reports, one by one. I aggregate all this stuff and the system crunches it up for me. So it's going to merge all of the kind of words, and I'm just not able to look at that. But I think we have a similar situation, right? I think we have a situation, and it would make sense as a conspiracy theory if you were attempting to influence the state of the Bitcoin market and the altcoins, and you were the deep state, that you would want to recreate the pattern that existed from 2014 through 2016. Or to about middle 2016. It allows you delay, it allows you control over it, et cetera, right? Now, the reason that I say this, that they might want to do that, is because of the sheer level of adoption that can easily be tracked. And that adoption can be tracked in any number of metrics, but let's just choose jobs. The number of Bitcoin jobs and the amount of people amount of companies trying to hire individuals to do blockchain kind of work, as well as the salaries that they're paying on them and the persistency of the headhunters, is very reminiscent of earlier tech booms, but a very consistently growing way. So if we were to look at blockchain as a push in terms of the language, in terms of the hiring, rather, not the language, but the hiring, then we would be in maybe 1997 or 1998, and we would still have the hiring booms of all of 98, all of 99, and 2000 ahead of us. We're ramping up in a serious way, but it's also very undeniable. I mean, I've got, hang on a second here, let's see what that worked out to. Jobs, the number of jobs is up 940% for blockchain-related computing in all categories. Okay, so this would be this would include personnel managers being hired to manage specifically focused blockchain teams. Okay, it would also include marketing people to sell software related to blockchain stuff. So it's not just programmers, but it's up 940% over the last 18 months, and shows no sign of letting up at all, which is, just staggering proof. And then you start looking at who is actually doing this. You know, Amazon's got blockchain projects going. And some of the cool stuff about that, I keep getting referrals from a number of different headhunting outfits and this kind of thing to try and get me to go and talk to Amazon and take a blockchain job. And this is escalating, not just with Amazon, but places like weird places. Aircraft manufacturers, not just banks, right? All different kinds of networking application guys are interested in blockchain. One of the big things now is the potential impact of cloud computing on blockchain through the, I don't know how it's pronounced because I'm not around them anymore, but the Kubernetes or Kubernetes design, where you're spreading information across potentially thousands of servers, but looking at it as though it was on one server on one directory, and that implication on the blockchain. They're hiring specifically for that. So it's not like blockchain's going away. So the current depression in price, now bear in mind, we scaled up to 13,000 way ahead of where we should have relative to my data, but the general trend was in an up move all the way through into what I had termed sci-fi world, which the long-term data sets had said was going to bust out in 2020 and dominate us in terms of everybody trying to get into the sci-fi application or sci-fi industries from 2020 onward. But those next 3 years, 2020, 2021, and 2022, would just be frenetic activity. China, US, any place you can name, right? And then it would take 15 to 20 years to spread out to the rest of the planet and go off world. So let's have another sip of tea and we'll go on to the next one here. I'll let you have a minute to have a look at the chart. And if you're viewing this non-live, you can always stop it and go through it totally. It's the same chart, it's just been shifted such that we have a blank space for doing some projections here. Okay. Now, once again, the disclaimer: this is not financial advice. This is projections on data that I've already told you was polluted, that I think I've been able to tease out some interesting level of information from that data. And I probably could have written a report from that teased out information, but I've decided to hold off and see how some of the temporal markers I've got that extend through into February pan out. If they do pan out, then I'll figure out some way to issue another report in the February to March time frame. If I'm allowed. There's also that. Okay, I don't want to come up with regular woo-woo guy persecution complex stuff here, but there's a resistance to my work, okay, that I'm encountering at officialdom, and they're pushing at me in all these weird little ugly ways. They don't want me to issue the report, or they want to delay it, or I'm not really sure why I'm being hassled, because I haven't really done any work here this past 5 months. But anyway, so I've got some temporal markers laid out. I've got a little booklet of them here I've printed out for myself, and I'll see how they work out. If they do work out, then it means my new algorithms and the way I'm doing the processing have some hope of overcoming this huge disinformation flood that's coming out. All right, so some of the things we can look at, we can start in on the top there. Everybody will see that we've got the Bitcoin halving in May of 2020. That's a big deal in the data sets, has been for like 5 years. Why that halving over any other one, I don't know, but it was. Now I think I have some hints. At the earlier time, I did not. My projected low for BTC price would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $1,215.20 if the, and this is a big damn if the numeracy of this and patterns of the current situation continue as they are. Okay, then I actually think if we go back and look at the other chart, that you'd actually see that this kind of thing sort of echoes. It doesn't mirror. It vaguely echoes in a similar kind of a way the Mt. Gox issues, right, of a number of years back. And if this is the case, in Mt. Gox, we had a period of time that was basically 18 months to 2 years that the prices were flat with little interest and activity. That's no longer the case now because of the huge amount of interest in Bitcoin cryptocurrencies. Even in a negative state, there's a big amount of interest, and there's a lot of language about it. Again, also from alternative media, those people that are big Bitcoin enthusiasts, but also corporations that want to get into blockchain and do all of these kinds of things. So if this is correct, then I would suspect that 1215.20 is the extreme low point here. I would suspect also that maybe 2800 is a low, somewhere between 2800 and 1200 per Bitcoin. And if that is accurate, then we're looking at that level of accuracy hitting us here, or that level of low hitting us here, say June, July, or August of this coming year. And so we're going to just trail down, up and down, trail down kind of stuff to that level. I don't think we're going to have a precipitous drop and then head over, unless everybody that watches, unless millions of people watch this and they quickly sell out their Bitcoin and wait for this price in order to buy back. So this video may actually impact and get a Delphi loop going here, and we would pollute our own projections. But if it's being controlled by the deep state, then it'll, in my opinion, the way in which the language seems to suggest it shows that the low would be about 1200, and we'd reach it about 7 months from now, 6 or 7 months. And then from that point on, it's going to be really freaky, okay? Because I've got panic and panic to buy. Panic, it's like, I got to get a Bitcoin. And this is not being driven by Bitcoin. It's not being driven by the Bitcoin price per se. It's being driven by external macroeconomic factors. And it starts hitting us in August of 2019. And the interesting part of this is, okay, so we'll get back to the interesting part of all of that. Let's just continue with this for a second. So the panic language escalates to the point of impossible. And it's impossible to buy Bitcoin in a period of time, let's just say February of 2020, the data shows that it's basically impossible to get hold of Bitcoin. And so the price escalates beyond all of our understanding then. And this is part of the issue of the halving and that hard deadline, so to speak, approaching. But it's also being hugely driven, according to what I see in the data sets, by these macroeconomic factors. Now, this is difficult to explain, guys. So let's go back up to the top of the chart and read down past the projected low there. You see these two little blue bubbles, bluish bubbles. One has harsh and brutal winter, and the other has deadly fatal winter. And that winter is a lot larger. Huge, these are like word cloud compressions. So harsh, brutal is describing what we're going to undergo this year. The deadly fatal winter is for the winter of 2019 into 2020. And that'll be participating in a lot of these other macroeconomic factors that are going to be hitting us. And the macroeconomic factors that are going to be hitting us are going to impact the traditional markets, and the traditional markets are going to be transformed, but not, or in both good and bad ways, but not from any internals so much as, at least in what I'm seeing in the data, as from external socio-political activities. So imagine a point occurs here in early 2019 that several governments in Europe collapse. And I'm not talking about revotes. I'm not talking about new government, where the government dissolves and they elect a new parliament. I'm talking about collapses, that people refuse to work for them. They try and stage elections and people don't show up. They try and turn autocratic and they're chucked out by garbage men with garbage trucks surrounding the Palace du Presidente and letting no one in or out. And they basically starve them out in a couple of months. It's like, it's not yellow vest kind of thing. It's like serious. Okay, yellow vest guys are seriously expressing their dissatisfaction with the current situation. But when we get into this traditional markets transformation period of time, there are going to be people that are very serious that the whole structure of some of these governments has got to go. And that basically, it goes or we go. And when the we is so massive as to be the majority of the population, the government goes. And so we're going to see that occur. Won't be limited to just Europe. There could be a lot of areas that are affected, including in the United States, okay? And we'll see impacts, but it's going to be different because of the overlying federal structure is not going to be in the same position as some of these other states around the world. So we'll see it at state and local kind of a thing, especially cities here in the U.S. Anyway, though, so that's a diversion. But the traditional market transformation period, it's written in red there. It goes for a number of years. It extends out into 2023 and beyond. That's as far as I've looked. And we're talking about massive capital flows. So if we were to hypothesize, speculate, be wildly speculative and pick a country and put a name to it just for impact, just for emotional impact, we could say, what happens if the national state of Germany collapses? And what happens if that national state devolves into the individual states within Germany declaring themselves sovereign? And the capital inflows the capital that's in Germany would freak out and go rushing out until things stabilize. And where's it going to rush to? Well, so it looks like the USA markets from about, let's pick March of 2019, are going to be the beneficiary of a number of these other states around the planet collapsing and capital deciding it's safest in U.S. markets. Or U.S. cash. So there might be a big influx in people trying to get hold of dollars over that period as well, just because of the traditional aspect of it. And then, as I say, as we get into 2020, the conditions are so egregiously atypical and abnormal that insofar as even reporting in mainstream media that the Bitcoin price that all the alternative economic venues that are portable, okay? Real estate won't participate in this, but gold, silver, platinum, palladium, even diamonds to some extent, although very minor. But cryptocurrencies, in some large measure of those that survive at that point, will just go absolutely bonkers because of the wonkiness of traditional markets globally and lots of big capital trying to find a safe haven outside of its jurisdictions. because those jurisdictions are getting a little too crazy and they can't do business as usual. So that's that aspect of it. Another aspect of it for the USA world, for let's just say English-speaking dominated countries, because this will include Australia, and to a minor extent it will include parts of what had been Great Britain. And these will all be related to sci-fi world, okay? And the sci-fi world can be thought of as all of the STEM jobs, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. And we're going to have a huge explosion in activity in the sci-fi world, new tech industries. And it's going to be both officially launched and promulgated and pushed with money behind it, but also organically so as the cat gets out of the bag relative to smart people doing very smart things with computer-assisted engineering and computer materials modeling, this sort of thing. And we'll be coming up with all of these kind of new devices and new businesses that'll just be popping up like mad as older businesses are now being allowed to die. And so we'll be moving into this period of time. Just by the way, ahead of a major collapse in all the space industries and a crisis. Now, these are intimately tied together, but the sci-fi world is not dependent on space as much as we might think, because the sci-fi world is going to be able to react to those things that are going to be causing all the space-based industries such huge amounts of problem. We're going to get a couple of major satellite collisions with debris, and then the satellites become debris themselves, and it's going to get just terribly complicated, and we won't be able to do things in space for a number of years until sci-fi world pops up with a solution. At least traditional space, right? I'm not counting the woo-woo space, secret space program and that kind of thing, even though they will also have big problems navigating through all of the debris and stuff. But it looks like maybe 2023 to 2024, we actually start implementing an effective solution to the major problem we've got there. I guess I'll just call it, I'll come up with some word for the problem, but it's too much debris in space, basically. We won't be able to put anything through this canopy of debris. And then the canopy of debris is going to get even more fierce because of things that will happen energy-wise. So the recent wave that went through the planet on November 11th actually propagated out into space. And it will be other waves like that, both out from Earth and then in from space, that are going to cause this layer of debris around the planet to become very unstable, much more unpredictable than we even have at this point. And it'll get to the point where we won't be able to predict for safe launches. We'll have a number of launches that will just be blasted into further debris just by trying to get up there. And then there will be a hiatus, and it looks like 18 months to 2 years, and we'll come up with all different kinds of solutions. And then at the end of two years or so, which is like the 2023, 2024 period, we will actually be implementing those solutions in space. And I don't know what they are, how bizarre they're going to be or whatever, but they're part of sci-fi world. And sci-fi world is going to start piggybacking on new understandings that we're getting about our previously reverse engineered space alien technology. So we've grasped the prima facie stuff, the on the surface stuff of the space alien technology, and now we're about to delve into the machine tools to build those, and then another level of understanding of the space alien technology in a way we had not quite comprehended. Now, it may be that scientists have gotten that understanding now, but within the sci-fi world, it'll be released at a greater level to the general population, at least within the corporations. And then it goes from there. We start hiring people to do, job titles we can't even imagine at this point. And then we got to keep hiring more people. And no, a lot of this stuff can't be done by robotics because they're too expensive for what we need to do. And so the nature in the sci-fi world, the nature of the labor market is going to radically change. The nature of who pays what for, or how much for what kind of work is going to be totally upended as we get into these new basic industries that will be supporting, that will be the GM and the Ford and this kind of thing 100 years from now. Those guys will be formed over this period of time, this little purple band there, the sci-fi world, as part of major social changes. Now, we'll also see as part of the major social changes, weird changes in the migration as well. This gets back to the deadly fatal winter part of this, right? In the winter of 2020, which will, for us, we're going to have to consider is going to be the begin in Australia in our summer. So in July of 2020, when they're in their winter, we'll know for sure that this temporal marker is accurate because it'll be on that leading edge of the blue, and they will be having horrific winters like never before seen in the southern hemisphere. That will be so impacting as to cause macroeconomic issues. Mines shutting down, crops being destroyed, mudslides, rivers changing course, all different kinds of issues in those areas that are affected in the southern hemisphere. And then it'll move into the northern hemisphere, and we're going to get into the deadly and the fatal aspect of it. Lots of people are going to die because of the conditions that will exist in that winter. And it'll be an issue of, not being able to maintain electrical grids, networks, not being able to get heat to people, emergency relief convoys and emergency relief convoys to whole nations that'll be put together, not very well, but will be put together reasonably fast. And we're talking about, ships, giant ships trying to get fuel and stuff to major cities just to keep them going until the weather will break. So it's going to be quite the terrible winter, and we'll have to get ourselves, as well situated as we can for that, and then endure it. But that winter is going to also be a major impetus for this huge area of social change that feeds into the sci-fi world. Now, you notice that little orange area there, okay? The orange area on the purple bar. That's where the data would tend to suggest that the capital markets are going to be completely transformed, and that the traditional market structures of stocks, bonds, derivatives, etc., will be in a stage of basically dissolution, alteration, or collapse. And we'll be doing a lot more on digital currencies and cryptos and that sort of thing. We will have been beyond the Bitcoin halving and whatever gyrations of price problems it's going to cause, and we'll be getting into our our social transformation into sci-fi world, which is, George Jetson kind of stuff, or Blade Runner kind of stuff, right? Because there'll be a lot of biologics that'll be impacted by this as well. We'll be doing new stuff with biology. No, not making, cat frogs or something, but entirely new applications for biological understandings, and the implications for medical are just huge. We'll be getting into computers that will analyze your entire metabolome and give you your metabolometrics, the total sum of everything you're taking into your body, including pollutants. And you'll be able to get a list, for instance, and see those things that are impacting you. And so within this orange period of time, the traditional markets will see flow go into sci-fi world in a huge way from the traditional markets. All different kinds of companies moving into these new technologies. And then, as I say, we reach a point in the 2022 region where the dangers and risks of debris in space have escalated to the point where they're causing problems, and then cause problems that we simply can't ignore because it happens 3 times in a row and no one's willing to do it the 4th. And that's where we are. Then a couple of years of basically not very much in the way of space activity. And then we come up with a couple of solutions. A few of them fail, but one does succeed in the 2023 to 2024 period. And then we start cleaning up space the way we need to clean up our oceans. Maybe even that solution might also be applicable to oceans. I don't know. I didn't even get down into Earth-based data for this. I was just staying at a macroeconomic layer. Anyway, so I'm going to wrap it up here fairly quick. I haven't been looking at chat because it's too fast and I don't want to get dizzy. So I don't know how many of you bastards are out there listening to this, but this is the generalized projection of this. Now, one thing we really need to look at, it's been ignored till now, is that black bar there, okay? The dominance of the emotional tone, that's what EM tone is, by the mainstream media. And this includes the propagation to all the useful idiots that are in alternative media that pick it up and become pro or anti whatever talking agenda is being put out. That appears to have a hard stop as of the 1st of March of 2021. That's why that little dashed line is there. Thereafter, in the data sets and the projection for the long-term language, mainstream media is in no way dominant, doesn't even appear to exist in a large form. This could be due to any number of different conditions, and I could even be misreading the data. But nonetheless, it appears that as of that point, broadcast media, as we understand it now, dominating the official tone with their, quote, reporters going to things like, political events or, White House kind of press briefings. After that, it's not the same world, okay? And so that might change gradually over the course of 2019 and 2020, or it may be a very sudden condition that occurs as a result of these things. But again, the mainstream media dominance of the emotional tone is going to shift due to the sci-fi world emerging and wholly new technologies for accomplishing all different kinds of tasks, including communications. And so we look at the last thing I wanted to bring up and focus on here is that green line for Bitcoin, from the projected low up through some unknown high. And that line may be hugely elevated, but we're going to go exponential at some point because the word impossible, or the phrase impossible to buy, impossible to find, impossible to locate at any price. Those kind of things are showing up. And so we'll go exponential for some period. Might be a couple of days, might then crash, I don't know. But in that period of time, it's going to rise up very radically. And this, I think, is the period of the upset of the pattern. I've had data that has been independent of all of this kind of stuff, showing that Bitcoin was struggling against previously established patterns that create things like this chart. Okay, so the underlying chart, as used by the chartists, there's going to be a fundamental shift in the kind of data that comes into that, and it's going to cause a break to previous patterns for Bitcoin. I had expected that break to have occurred already with the 13,000 pump up in December, but the language is still showing up with this thing in the future. And so I'm putting it there as part of as the break with the pattern, because I do have data going around the idea of impossible to find, impossible to locate, impossible to buy. And thus people just keep escalating the price because they want the stuff, because there's a socio-economic need to have it. And so there's a lot of need language, not want, not like, not wish, but need. There's also a lot of language where we see between the X for the BTC impossible point and the line down below it here for panic buying. In that area right in there is where a lot of the language of sovereign settlements, Bitcoin being passed between countries to settle huge debts kind of thing, starts showing up. Not that they're going to do it then, but that is part of the impetus for this, right? And it may be at that point that, if the German government collapsed, for instance, and Germany separated into its individual sovereign states, what does that do to the euro? Would you accept a euro without sovereign federal Germany at the helm, basically? A lot of capital guys might really question that sort of thing. So there's a lot of questions that arise in all of this. Now, all of this is admittedly and definitively stated being derived from data that I know to be manipulated and polluted. And I've just done my best using my existing technology and some new algorithms that have analyzed that pollution. So I thought I was able to screen some of it out to go through and do this. And so I ran the regular processing for a report, but until I've got those temporal markers that I've laid out through in February, I'm not inclined to do one simply because I can't validate that the algorithms are accurate. It's not a case of like the early days when I had to write new extensive code, because in those days what I could do, I could check against my data sets in a real-time fashion and do some debugging and watch it. Now we're looking at some very complex fourth and fifth order processing of existing information, and so and it's in huge volumes just to be able to get out something that doesn't have all of the MSM disinformation pollution. And so, for instance, my processing throws out any articles that are bringing in language in which I find any of that sealed indictment crap or any of the Q stuff or any number of these memes that are being projected out. A number of them have failed. Deep State's brought out a number of memes in the past, 5 or 6 months, and I can see that a lot of them have just crapped out. No one's picking up on them, and they're just sort of languishing. It's interesting what is and what isn't being picked up organically. And so that's why I think a lot of this is not the deep state paying disinformation agents so much as it is they are putting out a lot of chaff to see, or chum, to see which useful idiots consume it and then pass it on to the rest of their audiences. So no, I don't believe that anybody is actually paying Simon Parkes, this British woo-woo guy that thinks he was raised by bugs, that his mama and papa are bugs. I don't think anybody's actually paying him to state that there's, 40,000, 60,000, whatever, sealed indictments. I think that he's doing that for his own internal purposes in promulgating his work and his channel, and he thinks it's a safe bet to repeat and amplify. Okay, so a lot of this is amplification by useful idiots, and I've been able to screen out a lot of that. But it's been very brutal on the data because those memes are so widespread. Huge areas that I'd been able to count on getting base data from, I just can't anymore. And I've had to eliminate them. I've had to restructure all of my hot site lists and this sort of thing. So it's been actually very interesting. I've been ill. I've been trying to do recovery, build my body back up. We got contractors here. It's just not been a good time to do concentrated thinking and going through the data for a report. So it was a good time, though, to do analysis and to write these routines. So we can all come back to this at some point, and you can pause the video and look at the little charts as much as you want. The little red line at the bottom there, I drew it and put a dip in it because it's not going to be straight down to that point. I have no idea what the choppiness part of this stuff is going to be involved with. However, if I were inclined to do trading with the intent of accruing a great number of effective, good alternative coins and tokens, I would personally, I'm saying no one else, but I personally will be looking in that period of time where there is that red line as my buying opportunity. And so this is not financial advice because I'm obviously a lunatic. And so you don't want to take the financial advice of a lunatic, which eliminates most of the people on mainstream media, everybody on CNBC and MSNBC, because we all know they're, absolute batshit crazy. And that's even worse than being a lunatic. A lunatic, by the way, is someone who's influenced by the moon, whose thoughts are influenced by the moon. So that's going to, wax and wane. Whereas if you're batshit crazy, that's a straight line to hell. So anyway, I'm going to get off of that for a second and do a wrap up here. And so I've taken an hour and some minutes here. Let me just see if I've got anything left I wanted to go into. So the emotional tone that the MSM is promulgating is getting increasingly desperate. I have this thing I call an intensity factor. It's a numeric representation of the... Hang on a second. Dog's disconnecting my computer here. So my intensity factor is a numeric representation of the emotional impact that a word has on an individual's brain, isolated. And obviously phrases combine. So, bastard, rat bastard, higher level of emotional intensity. You rat bastard, very much higher emotional intensity value. Doesn't have anything to do with the duration. The duration has to be how long it impacts you, how long that emotional change, that hormonal change in your body and your brain, producing different thinking and an emotional response. So the intensity causes that, but the duration aspect of that is within the context. So there's not a direct correlation there, but there is a direct correlation or a direct line now within the patterns for mainstream media and all of their useful idiot shills, and they're all ramping up the emotional intensity values of the language that they're using. Speculation as to why now, et cetera, et cetera. I just know that it's ongoing, and I've reflected some of that within the two charts here. I hope it's very accurate. I hope there's some understanding of what has happened to my process and why I didn't do a report for December. It was my intent to get that idea across so that I don't leave people hanging, and to give you some idea of what's coming up into the future here, insofar as what the data processing does show. And for like the sci-fi world, that kind of thing, I'm fairly certain that those are good sets. The Bitcoin panic language is solid. Its timing is within a couple of weeks either way. I'm not going to get into guessing on that because I'm certain it's fluid at this point. The impossible to buy language starts almost immediately when we start seeing the panic language, and it escalates to overtake the panic language within just a few short months, maybe less than 2 months. It might just be on the order of 6 or 7 weeks. Again, it's fluid at the moment. So that's pretty much the state of the system now. I don't have an intention of producing a report until I've gone through and seen the level of accuracy of the 24 or more temporal markers I've got sketched out through the end of February. So if we run into a situation where January temporal markers are just falling, just boom, 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 being fulfilled as projected within good timing, then indeed I may start working on a report early because I'll have a lot more confidence in the data sets and the new algorithms. I'm also going to continue to work over this month through in developing scrubbing techniques and new algorithms for the data to prevent this from happening in the future, and also analyze even further what exactly had occurred and when it occurred. Not that that's going to tell me who or why, and I don't really care at this stage. That's not really pertinent. But as I was saying, juxtaposed against the Bitcoin price is the sheer number of new jobs around the language associated with Bitcoin, which is blockchain. So blockchain ain't going away. It's penetrating all kinds of industries in a way I would not have anticipated. And there's some hints out there of major, like tier 1 capital outfits that are doing blockchains of a distributed ledger algorithms, technically blockchains, that will be not mined, but will be internal and will have a very specific use for payment systems and atomic level swaps. And so that's a huge sign, giant sign. So it's, blockchain is our future, fiat is dying, and it's just a matter of living through the shit between here and there. And then hey, then it'll all happen and then you'll die. So, life's sweet in the meantime. Once again, disclaimer, this wasn't financial advice. I've got to shut down and do some stuff here, but may do one of these in January, referencing the temporal markers, if we see that indeed they are behaving as predicted. Thank you very much for watching, and that's the end of it. You can pass this one around. The charts can be used for what use they are as we go forward, and you should be getting a real good indication on the second chart as to the accuracy if we see that we're pushing into the 12-15 range, and then it holds there, and then we start heading up after that period of time. But it'll be it's going to be a interesting 2019. Not so much because of the Bitcoin action or because of new inventions in blockchain, but because of the macroeconomic factors that'll be pushing on all of that. Bye, guys. And